Welcome to the Monster Hunter Ecology report for Bazelgeuse, the explosive wyvern. Bazelgeuse mainly reside in the Elder's Recess due to the vast amounts of bioenergy stored there. However, with the influx of Elder Dragons, Bazelgeuse have been forced to abandon their home in search of new lands to conquer. Nomadic in nature, this apex predator will establish itself at the top of the food chain in any ecosystem. Mostly seen in the New World, Bazelgeuse is sometimes seen in the Old World, as noted by the scholars studying captured monsters. Bazelgeuse are unusually large for flying wyverns. A bulky upper body combined with an even larger wingspan make a dangerous combination that can often kill targets simply by slamming into them. The top of the wyvern's body is covered in thick scales that give off a bronze sheen. The underside is also covered in scales, but they protrude outwards, so that they can be easily detached for combat purposes. These scales are created using fluids that Bazelgeuse stores inside of its body. While it is large in nature, Bazelgeuse lacks any sort of defensive armor, relying purely on offensive capability to take down large monsters. Bazelgeuse have a distinct trait found only in one other flying wyvern, the ability to use their scales as weapons. Bazelgeuse have special scales on the undersides of their bodies that boast explosive capabilities. Once detached, these scales will stick into the ground until struck when met with heat, after which they will explode, dealing damage to anything caught within the blast radius. When aggravated, Bazelgeuse enter a superheated state indicated by a glowing red color coming from their scales. Once in this state, Bazelgeuse's scales become even more deadly, increasing in damage and detonating almost immediately upon impact with the ground. Along with its scales comes a blast-resistant carapace, as well as a large amount of muscle mass. Bazelgeuse can also release short-ranged fire blasts, but they don't normally rely on this to damage enemies. Instead, they use this ability to detonate nearby dormant scales. Bazelgeuse are extremely hostile and will attack anything that threatens their rule over territory. They will attack any large monster, but often will seek out wyverns that are higher up in the food chain. In fact, Bazelgeuse are known to actively seek out fights, routinely flying in after a hunter has engaged a large monster. Once combat begins, Bazelgeuse starts by softening up their targets with a bombing run attack. They'll fly over a large area and detach bomb pods, creating a minefield. After they finish covering an area in scales, Bazelgeuse will dive right into battle, often aiming to hit their target directly. In the process of doing so, Bazelgeuse also detonate a small amount of scales that they've detached, causing a chain reaction that detonates all the other scales that are close together. After doing this, Bazelgeuse finishes off whatever managed to survive the blast by simply slamming its enormous body into its prey, and of course, using more explosive scales. Bazelgeuse are apex predators, similar to Deviljho and Tigrex. Apex predators tend to assert themselves at the top of the food chain, in whatever environment they set themselves up in. Because they have little to no predators, these monsters often disrupt the local food chain that they decide to reside in. However, Bazelgeuse is unique in this factor. Unlike Deviljho, Bazelgeuse doesn't prey on everything in sight. In fact, Bazelgeuse is rarely seen attacking smaller monsters, and is believed to only hunt large monsters when it can. While this may simply be due to the fact that the larger the monster, the more energy it has, scholars believe that Bazelgeuse targets larger monsters simply to establish dominance within the local food chain. Bazelgeuse stands at the top of the food chain and is rarely contested. So far, only one other predator is capable of standing toe-to-toe with Bazelgeuse, the insatiable hunter Deviljho. These two apex predators will often compete for food and territory, and duels between them usually end up in a draw. Due to this behavior, both monsters are actually vital to the New World. Should one of either species become extinct, the other would simply dominate the local food chain. There is one other type of monster that not even Bazelgeuse would attempt to attack, however, and that is the Elder Dragons. When an Elder Dragon shows up, Bazelgeuse won't bother to even try and contest it. Instead, it will abandon its home in search of a new place to live. Now that we've learned a thing or two about Bazelgeuse, let's turn our attention to how to actually deal with this wyvern. With us is our very own field ecologist, Sarlaya. She'll teach you how to properly handle Bazelgeuse, as well as share some fun facts that our team has learned while researching this explosive wyvern.
Thanks, Professor Sparks. In this segment, we'll quickly go over how to deal with Bazelgeuse, as well as fun facts related to the explosive flying wyvern. Bazelgeuse often intrude on a hunt at the worst possible moment. If they do show up, be sure to have some thumb pods ready to shoo them away. Flash pods are extremely useful when fighting Bazelgeuse. Fire one into the air while it's doing a bombing run and watch it fall down from the sky. However, be wary of any scales that it managed to detach beforehand. While Bazelgeuse has high offensive capabilities, it lacks defensive options. Because of this, most of Bazelgeuse's body becomes a weak spot. Aim for the wings, head and back when looking to break its scales, and aim for the tail if you're looking for an extra carve. Bazelgeuse shares its unique use of scales with only one other flying wyvern, Ceregeuse. However, Ceregeuse is much smaller and uses its scales as flying daggers instead of heavy-hitting bombs. Bazelgeuse primarily reside in the Elder's Recess. However, with the increase in Elder Dragons in the New World, Bazelgeuse have been seen more frequently in other ecosystems. While Bazelgeuse does lack defensive capabilities, it should be noted that it does have a way of repelling monsters that can threaten it. This can be seen in a fight between a Deviljho and a Bazelgeuse. When Deviljho has Bazelgeuse in the grip of its jaw, Bazelgeuse will detonate its scales, dealing massive amounts of damage and causing Deviljho to let go.
That wraps up the Ecology report for the New World's very own Bazelgeuse. We hope you learned something today about the explosive wyvern that sits atop the food chain. This has been Professor Spark
and field ecologist Sarlia
with the Monster Hunter Ecology report for the King of Unwanted Appearances, Bazelgeuse.